Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. A low drone moved through the jungle floor before anyone registered it for what it was. Birds fell quiet. Water collecting on the leaves no longer dripped. Somewhere deep beneath the limestone ridge, stone moaned, not the sharp crack of a fracture, but the long-held exhale of something shifting in its sleep. No alarms. No landslide. Just a subtle change in the shape of the forest's breath. 3 days passed before the call came through. A guide named Malik mentioned a narrow rupture had opened along a fault line near the northern escarpment. Not dramatic, he'd said, more like a peeled seam. Enough to expose air that hadn't moved in thousands of years. The man who took that call had walked these ridges since before satellite mapping existed. His maps were in charcoal, his data recorded in insects and soot. No hurry in his movements, but always that quiet lean toward something deeper. He arrived on foot, refusing the motorbike. By the time he reached the site, mist had already settled into the exposed rock. Cables were drawn across the opening for safety. The drop wasn't vertical, more a crushed passage, half-choked with earth and stone. He knelt, pulled back a vine without looking, and stared at the hollow that had no business being there. Dust clung to the upper stratum. Not from collapse, too fine. Airborne. Ancient. He descended without announcement. Rope slid through his palms like a remembered ritual. Each foothold softened by centuries of rot. One section gave beneath his boot, revealing smooth rock beneath. A kind of wall, but not one laid by hand. Nature had pressed it into form with heat and pressure. Light skimmed across the surface. Nothing unusual. Until the second bend. Where the wall curled inward, the shape shifted. Handprints first, splayed wide with pigment leached to gray. Some overlaid by animal shapes. Elongated bores, curling tails, rigid spines. But farther in, where the light no longer reached and moisture failed to gather, the paint held its color. A single figure stood alone, scratched deeper than pigment could reach. At first glance, a shape like a staff or spear. Closer, it revealed fins. No panels. 3 limbs flaring outward from a central shaft. Not symmetrical. Angular wounds cut across the base, blackened not by time, but by intention. No artist signed it. No repetition anywhere along the chamber. Just that one image, carved with hands that had no names, onto rock that should have hidden it forever. Silence settled around the figure. The kind that doesn't press, only waits. Moisture from his breath didn't reach the surface. It seemed to reject it. He remained kneeling longer than he realized. Not out of awe. Not even confusion. There was no story that made this make sense. Not yet. Outside, the air felt thinner. Jungle sounds resumed in fragments. The guide asked what he'd seen. He said nothing. Just stared at the dirt beneath his nails, still packed with dust older than any record he could reference. Something had been watching that cave, and whatever marked that wall hadn't done it from imagination. No pigment flaked from that surface. Not even under the light's heat. The shape remained fixed. Long, narrow, ribbed down the center like segmented armor. 3 arms jutted from the midsection, thin and precise, terminating in shapes no animal would mimic. Not antlers. Not claws. Clean geometry carved with such sharpness the groove edges hadn't dulled in 40 millennia. He adjusted his position. Cold bled through the fabric at the knees. Light shifted against the contours, revealing subtle dips along the body of the form, indentations too shallow to notice on first glance. He angled his camera and took the first shot. No flash. No stabilization. Just silence, broken only by the faint click. Again from the side. Then above. High resolution, long exposure, side-lighted. After 6 angles, he changed lenses. No commentary, no muttering. His breathing slowed. Elbows locked against the rock. Each photograph taken with hands that understood what should be expected and recognized immediately what wasn't. At the base, faint scoring cut across the stone, not part of the image, but radiating from beneath it. long scratches in a directionless pattern, some arcing outward, others branching off in parallel trails. A few overlapped with darker smudges, almost black against the sandstone, but dry. Not ink. Not soot. Char. He traced a finger near the edge. The dust refused to cling. Every time his skin neared contact, static bit into the tip. He pulled back. From behind came the sound of boots against rock. The younger voice was casual, asking if he needed help. The light from the entrance threw a longer shadow than expected. The second figure stepped in, gave a low whistle, and leaned forward. Looks like graffiti. Some hiker with too much free time. Probably a drone junkie. No response. Just the slow removal of a second camera, heavier, more precise. The form was sketched twice. Once on paper. Once digitally. No template. Freehand. Every line memorized with the caution of someone who could not afford inaccuracy. Outside the chamber, the equipment cases were already unlatched. Samples taken from the surrounding pigment layers. Outer rings of the animal shapes scraped for composition. But this image remained untouched. 3 nights passed before the results came through. Argon decay ratios from one lab, uranium series from another. No contradictions. Every layer older than 40,000 years. The graphite signature was pure, unblended. No binder. No synthetic base. He read the results once. Once only. Folded the paper. Laid it on the cave floor. Took the camera apart piece by piece, slow, methodical, as if reducing noise. As if quiet could hold the discovery in place a moment longer. Outside, a breeze kicked up over the ridge. The guide shouted something about the road washing out. The words came muffled, irrelevant. Inside, the image hadn't changed. The proportions remained true. Not art. Not myth. Not abstraction. He'd seen similar cross-sections before. Not in books. Not in museums. In technical files. Blueprints. Retired launch diagrams. This shape did not belong to the past. It hadn't even lasted long in the present. The wall held it anyway. Without error. Without context. Without explanation. The sketch had been redrawn twice more. Not to refine it, every line already lived behind his eyes, but to test for distortion. Each draft returned to the same proportions. Length of body. Flare of panels. Angle of scoring near the lower segment. No variance. No uncertainty. He waited 2 days before pulling the name from his note. Not because of doubt. Because memory carried weight, and this particular thread led to someone who had once warned him not to call unless certainty outweighed consequence. He used an older phone. Landline. Unlisted. The voice on the other end answered without greeting, like someone halfway through a thought. He spoke the word satellite. Didn't explain. Just described the shape. Long body. 3 lateral projections. Rear plating scored near the vent port. No mention of cave. No talk of pigment. Silence stretched. Not the kind that searched for words, but one that measured risk. The reply came short. Not a question. A confirmation. That's K-47. The tone did not waver. No surprise. Just the sound of a man naming something buried for decade. Built in 61. Launched early 62. Polar orbit. Mission terminated within 6 months. Position lost mid-decay over the Pacific. The transmission ended without farewell. No click. No static. Just absence. He retrieved the photograph. Laid it beside a declassified diagram stored in a file long dismissed as Cold War redundancy. The overlap was absolute. Same dimensions. Same asymmetry in the panel joint. Even the scoring near the base aligned with the trajectory simulations of atmospheric reentry damage. It shouldn't have lasted more than a few rotations before burnup. The next message arrived unprompted. 1 line. Do not publish. No name attached. No signature. He replied with a single image. Not the sketch. Not the photo. Just the raw pigment analysis. 41,000 years, minimum. Char blend traced to ochre and hematite, local to Sulawesi. The response came by letter. Not digital. Handwritten. Black ink. No return address. K47 was part of a sequence. Not officially numbered. No media. No external logs. Its purpose was to monitor radar fluctuations along Soviet communication nodes near Irkutsk. Not surface visuals, frequency shadows. Subaudible transmissions reflecting off low-orbit bands. The craft began adjusting its position unprompted. No software glitch. Course corrections occurred without command. Ground logs flagged it once before it vanished. The maneuvering did not follow Earth's curvature. It tilted toward a projection that did not exist at the time. The final signal returned coordinates that matched nothing on the surface, but the timestamp aligned with a seismic pulse detected near Wallacea. Same region. Same year. Unlinked. Archived under unrelated geological activity. Another photograph was attached. An early prototype of K47 in dry dock. Slight damage to panel 3. A narrow scar across the fuselage, identical to the one carved beneath the cave painting. He studied the image long past dusk. Every feature pulled tighter. Not through fear. Not through awe. Through something harder to name. Recognition without comprehension. Memory without origin. The hand that carved that satellite did not imagine it. It did not approximate. It remembered. The chamber did not welcome return. Humidity had risen. Dust hung closer to the stone, clinging to light as if reluctant to let it pass. A single lantern threw a tight cone across the lower wall, where the animal figures loomed in their silence. No movement, but something had shifted. Shapes once seen as decorative began to press forward with a weight previously overlooked. He placed the instruments with unusual care. Compass, sextant, star map rendered in polar coordinates, outdated but analog, immune to interference. Chalk marked the edge of each figure, not to deface, but to isolate. One ring held 4 animals, 2 boars, 1 figure with exaggerated limbs, and a set of scratches that looked accidental until the angles were measured. He drew lines. From the tip of one tusk to the arc of a claw. From the bent spine to the center of the adjacent swirl. The chalk formed a curve. Too wide for a symbol. Too exact for abstraction. Another layer beneath it showed a faded arc, nearly invisible until side lighting revealed the original pigment. The arc bent across the wall with subtle tapering, ending at a figure so worn its outlines bled into the stone. That figure wasn't a hunter. No spear. No forward motion. Just a posture, reclined, arms open, eyes wide. Not fear. Not worship. Observation. Above the figure, more points. Dots arranged in irregular clusters. At first glance, meaningless. But adjusted against the season's sky, mapped against the positions as they would have appeared in the Upper Paleolithic, Orion emerged. Tilted. Distorted by precession. But unmistakable. Below Orion, another arc smaller. Closer to the horizon line. Tracking across the same band of rock as the satellite carving. He rotated the map. Used red light. The trajectory matched a decaying orbit. 3 intersecting points along the arc were labeled by hash marks in different pigment. He scraped a sample from each. Lab analysis had returned them in layers. Separated by centuries. The satellite had not been drawn once. It had been corrected. Adjusted. Revised by generations who never met, whose tools changed but whose subject remained the same. One of the hash marks was fresher than the others. Not by decades, by thousands of years. Its composition included manganese, not present in earlier layers. The detail added there showed the panel crack more clearly, and a new mark near the satellite's rear. An angled cut sloping downward, distinct from the earlier damage. He compared it to the blueprint. Same flaw. Same location. Those marks were not art. Not expression. They recorded something seen, not imagined. A pattern too complex for chance, too specific for invention. He stepped back. The air shifted. Not temperature. Texture. Thicker now. less movement. He ran calculations without speaking. Orbital decay, atmospheric drag, launch angle, altitude loss. All numbers confirmed what he already knew. The final arc on the wall pointed toward a single position over Wallacea. Not land. Not ocean. Sky. Empty unless timed. Only visible once every 2 cycles. Same path. Same angle. No myth behaves like that. No story adjusts itself to physics. That wall wasn't painted. It was tracked. Over time. With care. With purpose. Not to celebrate. Not to explain. To remember. The badge was counterfeit, but the silence that met it was real. No guards questioned the credentials. No staff lingered near the terminal where he logged into the archive. The woman at reception pointed down a corridor without lifting her eyes. Fluorescent bulbs hummed too loud in a hallway that stretched too long. He moved without hesitation. Not confidently. Purpose bypasses confidence. The file came from a drawer labeled under an atmospheric monitoring subdirectory. Incorrect placement. Intentional. The contents didn't match the label. Inside, a sleeve marked K-47, black ink faded across the upper edge. No summary sheet. No mission log. He removed the first document. Launch confirmation, dated March 2, 1962. Altitude band, classified. Purpose, telemetry triangulation. Nothing beneath it referenced failure. No recovery data. No malfunction. The mission simply ceased. No conclusion. No debris. In the margins of a signal decay chart, a handwritten annotation caught his eye. Different ink. Different hand. 3 words only. Ion trace footprint anomaly. No elaboration. No context. He flipped the page. Another chart. Signal activity plotted against orbital decay. Clean descent. Too clean. Satellites lose altitude unevenly. This showed a smooth arc, mathematically perfect. That kind of pattern requires external correction or prediction. Nothing in the design allowed for that. The next sheet was older. Edges yellowed, staples rusted. Title handwritten at the top. Predecadal echo imprint. Below the title, a diagram of repeating frequency curves spaced across unequal intervals. Someone had circled 4 peaks and noted, non-correlative return. Return from what was not stated. A footnote at the bottom pointed toward an internal memo, long since removed. Only one line remained. 4 inquiries, G. Lupe Bacau. He read the name again. Not because it meant anything. Because it carried something that didn't belong inside that drawer. A person's name. Amid files designed to exclude them. The computer terminal froze when he attempted a search. No error. No crash. Just refusal. As if the system had decided the question itself was unacceptable. He left the archive before questions could form. Not once did he look behind. The flight to Romania was booked from a coffee shop with no camera. One way. Paid in cash. No luggage. Just the photograph. A single image folded inside a book that hadn't been opened in years. That name waited for him across an ocean. Not in a hotel. Not in an office. Somewhere quieter. Older. Out of sequence. The next answers would not come from files. They would speak with a voice. And that voice remembered what machines had chosen to forget. A gravel road led north, splitting away from the last trace of pavement. Pines leaned into the path like quiet sentries. No markers. No signs. Just tire grooves worn into mud that hadn't dried for weeks. The car stalled twice before reaching the gate. Barbed wire sagged across the entry, rusted and looped with old cloth strip. Beyond it stood a house built from poured concrete and cold timber, as if insulation had been an afterthought. 2 windows shuttered. One open, curtain unmoving. The man who answered had no hesitation in his movements. Not fast. Not slow. The kind that comes from doing nothing for so long that the body reverts to precision. No questions asked. No greeting offered. He turned, walked inside. Door left open just wide enough to be an invitation, not a request. The room smelled of iron and dried lemon peel. Light came from a single desk lamp, magnifying glass swung sideways. Books stacked in corners, none newer than 1983. On the wall, a corkboard pinned with printed telemetry maps, yellowed and curling at the edges. In the center, one image in perfect condition, an orbital projection with 3 trajectories crossing at a point labeled in pencil, Ghost Return. The old man sat without adjusting the chair. No introduction. Just one sentence. I built its ears. His voice was gravel without volume. Each word shaped more by memory than language. The array was sensitive to low-orbit distortion. Not for data. For silence between data. Noise shapes tell more than signals if you know where to listen. K-47 wasn't meant to see. It was meant to hear what was being blocked. For the first 2 months everything ran quiet. Fluctuations matched expected Soviet radar sweep. Atmospheric diffraction confirmed. But in the 3rd cycle, a harmonic returned. At first, assumed a bounce back. Common with long-range signature sweep. But this returned across multiple bands. Triangulated to coordinates that didn't map. Mid-ocean, no elevation. 2 weeks later, another return. Stronger. Same path. Identical interval. It shouldn't have existed. No transmission delay. No origin point. A response without source. The team labeled it an artifact. A glitch. But the data kept compiling. It drew a pattern. A loop with shifts, each aligning with a correction burn from K-47's thrusters. That's when the course deviated. Thrusters initiated a reorientation without command. Euro control confirmed. No manual override. The satellite began tracking a decaying orbit projected ahead by month. Not in reaction. In anticipation. It believed it was falling before the decay even started. They pulled telemetry. The burn calculations matched no Earth-based predictive model. Instead, they aligned with orbital decay forecasts logged 3 weeks later. As if something had written the failure into it before the failure occurred. The scar across the panel happened during that second correction. A torque misfire. Burned through its own stabilizer. Autonomy systems deactivated. Silence followed. The agency marked it as lost. Filed under propulsion error. But the coordinates of its last ping matched a point catalogued in a Paleolithic cave over 40,000 years ago. The old man didn't ask how he knew. He opened a drawer. Removed a folded note. One corner burned. On it, a diagram. Not drawn. Scratched into foil backing used in signal insulation. 3 dots. 1 curve. 1 arrow slashing downward. It wasn't from his time in the lab. He found it mailed to him 5 years after retirement. No message. No return. Just the shape. The same one scratched into a cave that no hand today could explain. He held it out without speaking. The image felt cold, though the foil had warmed in the room. There had never been a malfunction. The satellite responded to instructions no one had sent. From a source that hadn't yet existed. Or had existed long enough to be remembered in stone. The air inside the cave had changed. Not warmer. Not colder. Thicker, as if something had gathered in the weeks of absence, waiting beneath the surface of the rock. Footfalls no longer echoed. They landed without announcement, muffled by dust that no longer seemed passive. The wall had held its shape. No smudging. No decay. The satellite form remained untouched, though something about it felt deeper. Not different, just more final. The outline no longer invited study. It resisted interpretation. As if it had already been read enough times by eyes more ancient than language. The core team returned with portable mass spectrometers, uranium series equipment, and a micro-drill with diamond-tipped head. No one spoke during setup. No explanations were asked. Each knew what they'd come to confirm. The sample was taken from the upper rim of the image. Not the line work. The pigment crust. A flake barely larger than a fingernail. Uranium-thorium measurements returned within 2 hours. 4 samples. 2 independent labs. Median estimate. 41,300 years. Margin of error, less than 1%. Cross-checked with radiocarbon testing on surrounding organic matter. Charcoal from an adjacent fire layer. Nothing disagreed. The image was older than every written word. Older than metallurgy. Older than boat. But it depicted something that required orbital physics, metallurgy, modern combustion. The silence inside the chamber stretched long after the instruments shut down. One figure stepped forward with a secondary scanner. Not for pigment. For engravings. Beneath the satellite carving, where the rock dipped inward, a patch of discoloration had gone unrecorded. Dismissed as abrasion. Natural wear. Under infrared, the shape emerged. 3 slashes. 2 lines. One broken curve beneath them, with a triangle piercing its base. Not art. Not symbolic. Mechanical. Each stroke matched a pattern used in Cyrillic shorthand. Letters etched during equipment marking in Cold War engineering shop. A translation key was pulled from an old aerospace archive. Not public. Stored from a dismantled Soviet factory manual. The markings translated loosely into 3 actions. Drift. Fall. Burn. Not names. Not prophecy. Commands. He rechecked the translation twice. Each word matched. Each word described exactly what the satellite had done. The marks had been made with pressure, not abrasion. Cut into the rock by a tool harder than flint. Angled with intent. No attempt had been made to decorate. No flourishes. No animals surrounding it. Just that instruction. In a script not known in any region of the Paleolithic world. No one moved. No photograph was taken. Not yet. The image did not ask for recognition. It had already been understood. Nothing about it wanted to be explained. Only remembered. The file had been labeled with a date, not a title. 37 pages. Images embedded without captions. Charts aligned but left unexplained. A draft meant for eyes that knew how to read around silence. It was never meant to circulate. Someone opened it. Not by accident. The breach was quiet, no trace in the version history. But the metadata shifted. A half-second modification logged from an unfamiliar IP. By the following morning, fragments of the document had surfaced on a private server, mirrored once, then again. A cropped photograph of the cave wall appeared without context on a minor archaeology forum. Within hours, it had spread. The first headline came from a fringe science blog. Misdated cave painting suggests early human contact with advanced machinery. No citations. No author. Just the image and a vague reference to Indonesian soil. The next day, access to the site was revoked. Uniformed personnel arrived without insignia, escorted by representatives from Jakarta's cultural ministry. Equipment seized. Field notes removed. The cave entrance sealed under metal plating and labeled as structurally hazardous. Journalists were told the site posed risk of collapse. No footage made it past the ridge. The email server went offline for 12 hours. When access returned, 2 folders were missing. One contained pigment analysis. The other held contact logs. The draft file remained untouched, but every name associated with it had been scrubbed from the header. No fingerprint. No author. A letter arrived by courier. Unstamped. No return address. Inside, a single page. Typed. Short. Your work is significant. Your access will be restored under conditional confidentiality. Further publication is neither required nor advisable. A sum has been allocated. Refusal is optional, not reversible. Below the message, coordinates. Latitude and longitude leading to a location west of the original chamber. Not yet surveyed. A second site. Or a decoy. No explanation. 2 days later, an obituary appeared in a small Pennsylvania newspaper. Name correct. Photograph wrong. A grainy headshot of someone 20 years younger. Cause listed as suicide by firearm. No funeral details. No surviving relatives. The aerospace engineer's name would not appear in any citation. Not anymore. A call to Romania rang without answer. 3 attempts. Same result. On the 4th, a woman picked up. Spoke no English. When asked for the old man by name, she paused, then replied in a voice that did not waver. No one lives here. The line cut. No signal since. By week's end, all external references to the image had vanished from public access. Articles removed. Forum threads locked. Cached images replaced with placeholders. Not suppressed, erased. But one detail remained. The carving under the satellite, photographed under infrared, had been posted anonymously on a defunct language database. Not indexed. Not tagged. Just stored. 3 words. Cyrillic shaped. Sharpened by time. Drift. Fall. Burn. Not prediction. Instruction. Dust drifted across the floor in patterns too slow to watch. The chamber breathed in intervals longer than the body could track. Lantern light stretched across the rock, not reaching the ceiling, barely touching the far edge. The satellite figure remained in shadow, but its presence held the center of the room like a weight built into the stone. No equipment, no assistants, no recorders, only silence and pigment, each more ancient than explanation. He sat close to the wall, knees drawn in, brush in one hand, a stone palette balanced across the other. Ochre, hematite, and charcoal mixed with water pulled from the runoff pool by the entrance. The same blend used thousands of years before. He hadn't measured. No ratios, no control sample. This wasn't a study. 3 times, the brush hovered near the stone before he lowered it. No voice spoke. No revelation announced itself. There was no sudden meaning. The image did not expand. The old lines did not shift. But something pressed from behind the surface, not physically, not metaphorically, just presence like a memory that wouldn't take form but refused to leave. He considered what was left. Every credential revoked or discredited. Every ally erased or silenced. The cave itself, sealed from official access. His name removed from the research archives. What had once been a career reduced to a file with no owner. The discovery couldn't be shared. No journal would print it. No university would acknowledge it. To speak it aloud was to mark oneself unreliable, unwelcome, irretrievable. But the image remained. Realer than any grant. Older than any institution. Not a clue. Not a cipher. A presence that had outlived language and survived untouched by belief. The brush touched stone. Not to interpret. Not to prove. To mark. To extend. He began to draw a line just outside the lower arc of the satellite. Not symmetrical. Not balanced. It curved downward with the same angle recorded in the orbital chart. No embellishment. No narrative. Just a continuation of what had already begun. Another shape followed. Smaller. A narrowing crescent that mirrored the decay of a failed orbit. He dipped the brush again. Pressed another stroke alongside it. Paused. Then added a single dot beneath the crescent. Nothing about the act sought meaning. Nothing asked for comprehension. The wall had accepted images before there was memory. It would hold them long after understanding passed away. His chest tightened, not from fear, not from exertion. Something quieter. The sense that time had stopped arguing. That every word written in opposition to this moment no longer mattered. The pigment dried without resistance. No flaking. No pooling. The wall received it as if it had been waiting. He added one final mark. A line. Broken near the center. Not explanation. Not closure. Just presence. Continuing. Light fell unevenly across the chamber walls, catching pigment in fractured rhythms as if it too were unsure what had been left behind. Not all the markings faced forward. Some curled behind columns of stone, others angled toward ceilings that couldn't be reached without scaffolding that had never existed. A language built from direction rather than grammar. Not meant to speak, only to remain. What had once been called art no longer belonged to that word. Nothing within the cave asked to be admired. Every line pointed. Every figure tracked. Not gods. Not spirits. Movement. Sequence. Return. The boar had always been a constellation. The hands had always mapped distance. The ochre trails that once seemed decorative proved to be parallax guides, measured by lunar drift. Even the fire pits, spaced in irregular clusters, matched star positions only visible from that latitude 27,000 years earlier. They had not worshipped the sky. They had documented it, and one among them, or many across generations, had seen something pass above that did not arc like a moon, did not drift like a star, did not burn like a comet. A form that returned, that turned, that failed in a way no natural body could replicate. It had been drawn not as prophecy, not as omen, as report. The satellite image remained the clearest figure in the chamber. Not buried in abstraction, not mythologized. Mechanical, specific, repeated with corrections across pigment layers separated by centuries. Someone had watched it fall, watched it twist as it tried to right itself, watched it fracture when its guidance betrayed it, watched it vanish in flame and remembered it. Not in story, in measurement. The wall had received the memory without translation. The pigment had preserved the curve of descent with an accuracy that modern software only confirmed. Even the angular gash along the panel was placed with a precision that ruled out imagination. No coincidence. The cave had waited, not as a secret, as a record, one meant to outlast names, outlast kingdoms, outlast language, not to explain, to remain. And someone whose face will never be found, whose tools were nothing more than shaped stone and pigment drawn from earth, looked up at the night sky, saw a machine cross the black, and knew it was made, knew it was failing, and understood it had come from a place no voice yet spoken could describe. But still they marked its path. Not so it would be believed. So it would not be lost. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.